A glamorous charity gala at an exclusive country club, 200 wealthy guests, crystal chandeliers, champagne flowing. Then a CEO slaps his pregnant wife across the face in front of everyone. He thinks he is untouchable. He thinks his money and power will make this disappear like every other problem. But he made one fatal mistake. The bartender watching from behind the counter is not just mixing drinks. He is her brother, a billionaire who has been waiting 3 months for this exact moment. What happens next will destroy everything this CEO spent his life building. If stories about justice and karma keep you watching, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Drop a comment telling us where you are listening from. Now, let me tell you how one satisfying slap cost a powerful man absolutely everything. The fluorescent lights hummed softly above Claire Weston's hospital bed, casting a sterile white glow across the small private room. Her face was swollen on the left side, a deep purple bruise spreading from her cheekbone toward her ear like a map of violence written on skin. A fetal monitor beeped steadily beside her, its rhythmic sound the only comfort in this cold, clinical space. Detective Ruth Brennan sat in a plastic chair pulled close to the bed. She was a woman in her early 50s with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and eyes that had witnessed too much suffering over 25 years in the domestic violence unit to be surprised by anything anymore. She held a small leather notebook in her weathered hands, a pen poised and ready. The detective had seen this scene hundreds of times. Wealthy woman, powerful husband, a story that everyone would rather not believe. But something about Claire Weston's trembling hands and hollow eyes told her this case was different. "Mrs. Weston," Detective Brennan said gently, her voice carrying the practiced softness of someone who understood that trauma required patience. "I need you to tell me everything. Start from the beginning of the night." Claire's hand moved instinctively to her stomach. 7 months pregnant, her baby was still safe, still growing, still protected inside her despite everything that had happened in the last 12 hours. She could feel the gentle flutter of movement beneath her palm, a reminder that she was fighting for more than just herself now. She closed her eyes and let her mind drift back to where it all began. The memory came flooding in like water through a broken dam, carrying with it all the fear, the shame, and the desperate hope that someone might finally believe her. That morning had started like every other morning in her marriage to Marcus Weston. Claire stood in front of the full-length mirror in their penthouse bedroom, examining herself with the critical eye her husband had trained her to use over 5 long years. The emerald green gown she wore cost more than most people earned in 3 months. It hugged her pregnant figure elegantly. The designer having made special alterations to accommodate her growing belly while still maintaining the sleek silhouette Marcus demanded. She turned slowly, checking every angle the way he had taught her, looking for flaws, looking for imperfections, looking for anything that might trigger his displeasure. Marcus Weston appeared behind her in the mirror, and Claire felt her body tense automatically. It was a reaction she could not control anymore. This involuntary clenching of muscles whenever he entered a room. At 38 years old, he was the picture of success. Tall, dark-haired, with a jawline that photographers loved and a smile that had graced the covers of Forbes and Business Weekly. He was the CEO of Weston Capital Group, a private equity firm that had made him one of the most powerful and feared men in Connecticut. To the outside world, Marcus Weston was brilliant, charming, and devoted to his beautiful wife. Claire knew better. He placed his hands on her shoulders, and she fought the urge to flinch away. His touch was light, almost tender, but she had learned that tenderness from Marcus always came with conditions attached. "The green makes you look pale," Marcus said, his voice carrying that familiar edge of criticism disguised as concern. "Are you sure you should be wearing something so fitted? The pregnancy weight is really showing now. People will talk." Claire swallowed hard against the lump forming in her throat. "The designer said it was flattering for my figure." "The designer wanted your money." His fingers tightened slightly on her shoulders, just enough pressure to remind her who was in control. "Remember, Claire, tonight is important. The Hartford Foundation Gala at Ridgewood Country Club. The governor will be there, board members, investors from 3 different countries. You need to be perfect. Absolutely perfect." Perfect. The word had become a prison cell she could not escape. "I understand," she whispered. Marcus leaned close to her ear, his breath warm against her skin in a way that made her stomach turn. No stumbling over your words like you did at the Chambers dinner. No wandering off to rest because your feet hurt. No embarrassing me in front of people who matter. He released her and walked toward the bathroom, leaving her staring at her reflection in the mirror. The woman who looked back at her was someone she barely recognized anymore. 5 years ago, Claire Holbrook had been a rising star at one of Boston's most prestigious law firms. Sharp, confident, ambitious. She had graduated top of her class from Yale Law School. She had won cases that partners of twice her age could not crack. She had a loving family, close friends who adored her, and a future full of endless possibilities. Then she met Marcus Weston at a charity event for children's literacy. He had been charming beyond measure that night, attentive in ways that made her feel seen for the first time in years, romantic in grand gestures that swept her completely off her feet. He sent flowers to her office every single day for a month. He flew her to Paris on his private jet for their third date. He told her repeatedly that she was the most brilliant, most beautiful woman he had ever met. The proposal came after only 6 months. The wedding was a society event covered by every major publication on the East Coast. The control started slowly, so gradually that she did not recognize it for what it was. First, it was gentle suggestions about her clothes, her hair, her choice of friends who he felt were not sophisticated enough for her new station in life. Then the suggestions became criticism. Then the criticism became isolation. Marcus convinced her that her family, the wealthy Holbrook dynasty who had built their fortune in technology and real estate, secretly looked down on her for marrying him, that her parents thought she had married beneath their expectations, that her brother Garrett believed she was a fool who had been seduced by a charming con artist, that she was better off without their constant judgment and interference. Claire believed him because she wanted to believe him, because believing him was easier than facing the truth about the man she had married. She cut ties with Garrett first, then her parents, in the final years before they passed away. Then every friend who might have seen through Marcus's carefully constructed facade and told her what she desperately needed to hear. By the time she realized what Marcus truly was, she was completely and utterly trapped. Claire, his voice snapped from the bathroom, sharp as a whip crack. Stop daydreaming and finish getting ready. The car will be here in 20 minutes. Do not make me come out there. She took a shaky breath and smoothed the fabric of her dress over her stomach, feeling her baby kick against her palm as if in protest. Tonight, she would be perfect. Tonight, she would survive. She had no idea that tonight would change absolutely everything. Ridgewood Country Club glittered like an exquisite jewel box against the darkening Connecticut evening sky. Crystal chandeliers cast warm, honeyed light through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked immaculately manicured gardens. Luxury vehicles lined the circular driveway in an endless parade of wealth and status, as uniformed valets rushed to assist the state's most powerful and influential residents. The air smelled of expensive perfume and fresh-cut flowers. The sound of a string quartet drifted through the grand entrance, playing something classical and appropriately refined. Everything about this place whispered of old money, quiet power, and the kind of privilege that most people could only dream about. Claire stepped out of the black Mercedes carefully, one hand braced against the doorframe for balance. Her back ached fiercely from the pregnancy, a constant dull throb that radiated down through her hips. Her feet were already beginning to swell inside her designer heels, pressing painfully against the delicate straps. She had learned to hide discomfort so well that it had become second nature. But tonight, every movement required conscious effort. Marcus appeared beside her instantly, taking her elbow in what looked to observers like a gentlemanly gesture of support. But his grip was tight enough to leave fingerprints on her skin, his fingers digging into the soft flesh above her elbow in silent warning. "Smile," he commanded through his teeth, his own expression perfectly pleasant for anyone watching. "You look like you are walking to your own funeral." She smiled. She always smiled. They walked through the grand entrance together, the perfect picture of marital bliss, and Claire felt the familiar suffocation of being on display settle over her like a heavy cloak. Everywhere she looked, she saw judgment waiting to pounce. Women examining her dress for flaws. Men assessing Marcus and calculating whether he was worth cultivating as an ally. Everyone measuring power and status and worthiness in the subtle language of high society. The main ballroom was magnificent, filled with round tables draped in pristine white linen and adorned with elaborate floral centerpieces. Silver candelabras flickered with real flame. A string quartet played softly in the corner near a grand piano. Servers in crisp uniforms moved through the crowd with silver trays balanced expertly on their palms, offering champagne flutes and artfully arranged hors d'oeuvres. The scent of expensive cologne mingled with fresh-cut roses and the subtle aroma of wealth that Claire had learned to recognize. It smelled like marble floors and leather furniture and money that had been accumulating for generations. Marcus guided her toward a cluster of men in impeccably tailored suits standing near the bar. Board members, investors, the people whose opinions he valued infinitely more than her own comfort or well-being. "Marcus, wonderful to see you," and one of them said warmly, extending his hand for a firm shake. "And this must be the lovely Claire. Look at you, positively glowing. Pregnancy certainly agrees with you." Claire produced her carefully rehearsed smile, the one she had practiced in the mirror until it looked almost genuine. "Thank you so much. It is such a pleasure to be here tonight. The foundation does such important work." The men launched immediately into conversation about market projections and acquisitions targets and quarterly earnings reports. Claire stood silently at Marcus's side, exactly as he expected her to. Her role at these events was decoration, background, a beautiful prop designed to make him appear more human and relatable to people who mattered. 20 minutes passed, 30. Her back screamed for relief with increasing urgency. Her feet throbbed painfully inside her heels. A wave of dizziness swept through her without warning, and she swayed slightly on her feet. Marcus noticed immediately, as he always noticed any imperfection. His fingers dug sharply into her elbow. "Excuse us for a moment, gentlemen," he said smoothly, his voice betraying nothing of his irritation. He guided her toward a quiet corner near the bar, his pleasant smile never faltering for the watching crowd while his grip tightened painfully with each step. "What do you think you are doing?" He hissed once they were out of earshot. "Marcus, I just need to sit down for a moment. The baby is pressing on my spine and I feel lightheaded." "The baby is fine. You are being dramatic as usual. Please, just 5 minutes to rest my feet." His jaw clenched so tightly she could see the muscles jumping beneath his skin. "You are embarrassing me. Everyone is watching us right now. Do you want them to think you cannot handle being pregnant, that you are weak and pathetic?" Claire felt tears prick her eyes, but she forced them back through sheer willpower. Crying would only make things worse. Crying always made things worse. At the bar, a young man with dark hair was polishing glasses with practiced efficiency. He looked up as they approached, and something in his expression shifted subtly. His eyes moved from Marcus to Claire, taking in the tight grip on her arm, the pallor of her face, the barely concealed fear in her eyes. Claire did not notice him watching. She was too focused on surviving the next moment, the next breath, the next criticism. "I just need some water," she whispered. "Please, Marcus, I feel like I might faint." Marcus released her arm with a shove disguised as a gentle release, the kind of movement that looked perfectly innocent to anyone not paying close attention. "Fine. Get your water. Then compose yourself and return to me immediately. You have 2 minutes. Do not embarrass me further." He walked away without looking back, already scanning the room for more important people to impress. Claire steadied herself against the polished mahogany bar, her hands trembling visibly. The bartender set a glass of ice water in front of her without being asked, pushing it gently toward her across the smooth surface. "Ma'am," he said quietly, his voice carrying a warmth that seemed out of place in this cold, glittering environment. "Are you all right?" She looked up at him, startled by the genuine concern in his voice. Something about his face seemed strangely familiar, but she could not place the feeling. Her mind was too clouded with exhaustion and fear and the constant effort of maintaining her perfect facade. "I am fine," she said automatically, the lie rolling off her tongue with practiced ease. "Just tired from the pregnancy." He did not look convinced, but he nodded and moved away to serve another customer. Claire drank the water slowly, letting the cold liquid calm her racing heart and settle her churning stomach. 2 minutes. She had 2 minutes to become perfect again. 2 minutes to rebuild the mass that was crumbling more with each passing day. She did not notice the bartender watching her with an intensity that had nothing to do with customer service. She did not notice the way his hands gripped the edge of the bar until his knuckles turned white when Marcus returned and took her arm again. And she certainly did not notice the small camera pinned to his vest, recording everything that happened in this corner of the room. The evening had progressed into its second hour when Claire felt another wave of dizziness wash over her with nauseating force. She had been standing beside Marcus for what felt like an eternity, listening to him boast about Weston Capital's latest acquisition, while his colleagues nodded appreciatively and laughed at his jokes on cue. Her feet had gone completely numb in her designer heels. Her lower back pulsed with a deep, persistent ache that radiated down through her hips and into her thighs. The baby was pressing insistently against her bladder, and she desperately needed to find a restroom before she humiliated herself in front of Connecticut's elite. "Marcus," she whispered during a brief pause in the conversation, tugging gently at his sleeve, "I need to excuse myself for just a moment." His smile never flickered, but his eyes turned cold as winter ice. "Not now. It will only take a minute, please." I said not now. The other men in the circle exchanged uncomfortable glances. One of them, a silver-haired gentleman named Thomas Fletcher, who served on 3 different charitable boards, cleared his throat diplomatically. "Marcus, surely your wife can step away for a moment if she needs to." "She is fine," Marcus interrupted, his voice carrying a sharp edge that made Thomas take a small step backward. "She just needs to learn patience. It is a virtue she has never quite mastered." Claire felt her face burn with humiliation. She was being scolded like a disobedient child in front of strangers. Again, the familiar shame washed over her, mixing with the physical discomfort until she felt like she might shatter into 1,000 pieces. She tried to wait. She focused on her breathing, on the distant music, on the pattern of the chandelier crystals, on anything except the pressure building in her body and the shame burning in her heart. But after another 5 agonizing minutes, she could not hold back anymore. "I need to sit down," she said, louder than she intended. Her voice cracked on the last word. Marcus spun toward her with a swiftness that made several nearby guests flinch. The pleasant mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the fury that always simmered beneath his polished surface. "What did you just say to me?" "I am 7 months pregnant." "Marcus, I cannot stand for 3 hours straight without any relief. My doctor specifically said I need to rest frequently." The words came out before she could stop them. She had spoken back, in public, in front of witnesses who mattered to him. Time seemed to slow down around them. Marcus grabbed her upper arm and pulled her forcefully toward a quieter area near the bar. His grip was bruising, his fingers digging into her flesh with punishing force. His breath was hot against her face, carrying the sharp scent of whiskey. "You are humiliating me," he snarled, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "After everything I have done for you, everything I have given you, everything I have sacrificed, this is how you repay me, by making me look like a fool in front of the most important people in this state. Marcus, please. People are watching us. Let them watch. They will see a hysterical pregnant woman who cannot control her emotions. They will feel sorry for me for having to deal with you." "That is not true. I just need to rest for a moment, please." "Shut up." Claire flinched at the word, at the venom dripping from his voice. But somewhere deep inside her, in a place she had almost forgotten existed, a spark ignited, a tiny flame of the woman she used to be before Marcus Weston systematically dismantled her sense of self. "No," she whispered, surprising herself. "I will not shut up. I am not hysterical. I am exhausted and uncomfortable, and you are hurting my arm." Marcus's face twisted into something unrecognizable, something monstrous that she had only glimpsed in their worst private moments. And then he raised his hand and struck her across the face. The crack of palm against cheek echoed through the ballroom like a gunshot, cutting through conversation and music and the clink of champagne glasses. Every sound in the room seemed to stop at once, replaced by a ringing silence that pressed against Claire's ears. Claire stumbled backward, her hand flying to her face where pain exploded across her cheekbone like fire spreading through dry brush. Stars danced frantically in her vision. She reached blindly for something to grab, her other hand instinctively wrapping around her stomach to protect her baby from the impact of a fall. The room fell absolutely, deafeningly silent. The string quartet stopped playing mid-note. Conversations died in mid-sentence. Every single eye in the ballroom turned toward them. 200 witnesses frozen in various poses of shock and disbelief. Claire looked up at her husband through tear-blurred vision, her cheek already beginning to swell. He was staring at his own hand as if it had acted without his permission, as if he could not quite believe what he had just done in front of so many watching eyes. Then his expression hardened into something calculating. "She stumbled," Marcus announced to the room, his voice carrying the confident authority of a man used to having his version of events accepted without question. "The pregnancy makes her clumsy. I tried to catch her before she fell." No one moved. No one spoke. No one believed him. Then the bartender stepped out from behind the bar. He moved with purpose and precision, placing himself directly between Marcus and Claire. His posture was calm, but coiled with barely contained energy, like a spring compressed to its breaking point. "Do not touch her," he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried through the silent room with unmistakable authority. Marcus blinked in genuine disbelief. "Excuse me, who do you think you are speaking to? I said do not touch her. Who do you think you are? You pour drinks for tips. Get back behind the bar where you belong before I have you fired and blacklisted from every establishment in this state." The bartender did not move. His eyes were fixed on Marcus with an intensity that made several nearby guests step backward instinctively. Claire pressed her trembling hand to her throbbing cheek and looked up at this stranger who had placed himself in danger for her sake. Something about his jaw, the determined set of his shoulders, the particular shade of blue in his eyes that nagged at her memory like a half-forgotten dream. But her head was spinning too fast to make connections. All she knew in this moment was that for the first time in 5 years, someone was standing between her and Marcus's rage. And Marcus Weston, for once in his privileged life, had absolutely no idea what to do about it. The standoff in the Ridgewood Country Club ballroom stretched into a long, impossibly tense silence that seemed to compress the air itself. Guests held their breath collectively. Champagne glasses remained suspended in midair. The string quartet sat frozen with their bows poised above their instruments. Marcus Weston, his face flushed an ugly shade of crimson with fury and embarrassment, squared off against the bartender who had dared to intervene in his personal business. "I am going to count to 3, Marcus said through gritted teeth, his voice trembling with barely suppressed rage. "Then I am going to call security, the police, and every lawyer in my considerable legal arsenal. You will never work in this state again. You will never work anywhere again. I will personally ensure that your life is destroyed." The bartender remained perfectly still, his expression unreadable. "Go ahead, call them all." Something in his voice made Marcus pause mid-threat. There was no fear in it, no hesitation, no nervous wavering, just cold, absolute certainty. Claire steadied herself against the edge of the bar, her hands still pressed to her bruised and swelling cheek. The pain was sharp and real, cutting through the fog of shock that had descended over her mind like a thick blanket. "Marcus," she managed to say, her voice small and trembling, "please let us just go home. We can talk about this privately." He turned on her with a snarl that made her flinch backward. "Do not tell me what to do. You started this disaster with your pathetic dramatics. Now I have to clean up your mess while everyone watches." "She did not start anything," the bartender said, his voice cutting through Marcus's tirade like a blade. "You hit your pregnant wife in front of 200 witnesses. There is no cleaning that up. There is no spin you can put on this. Everyone in this room saw exactly what happened." Marcus laughed, a harsh and brittle sound that echoed strangely in the silent ballroom. "Who are you to lecture me, some college dropout mixing cocktails for tips? You have absolutely no idea who you are dealing with. I could buy this entire club tomorrow and have it demolished just to make a point." The bartender reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a slim leather wallet. He flipped it open deliberately, revealing an identification card and something that glinted like metal beneath the chandelier light. "My name is Garrett Holbrook," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "And that woman you just struck is my sister." The gasp that swept through the ballroom was audible, a collective intake of breath that seemed to suck all remaining air from the space. Claire's hand dropped from her face, her vision blurred with fresh tears. But these were not from the physical pain radiating through her cheek. They were from recognition, from memory, from the sudden, overwhelming flood of emotion that crashed over her. Garrett, her brother, the brother she had not seen or spoken to in 5 long years. The brother Marcus had convinced her wanted nothing to do with her. The brother who had tried to reach her countless times in those early years of her marriage, sending letters and making phone calls that somehow never reached her. The brother she had pushed away because she believed the lies her husband whispered in her ear night after night. He was here. He had been here all along, hidden in plain sight, watching over her from behind a bar, waiting patiently for the moment when she would need him most. That is impossible, Marcus stammered, his confident facade cracking visibly. She has no family. She told me herself that they disowned her, that they wanted nothing to do with her after she married beneath their precious expectations. She told you what you made her believe. Garrett's voice was ice and fire combined. You isolated her systematically. You manipulated every piece of information she received. You intercepted letters and blocked phone calls and convinced her that the people who loved her most had abandoned her. You made her think her own family had thrown her away like garbage, when the truth is you were the one throwing away every attempt we made to reach her. Claire felt the room tilt dangerously around her. Garrett, I did not know. He said you and Mom and Dad thought I was foolish, that you believed I had married a con artist and you were ashamed of me. I believed him because I wanted to believe that you would eventually forgive me and reach out. But you never did. And I thought, they were never ashamed of you. Not for one single moment. Garrett's voice cracked with emotion he could not entirely suppress. Mom and Dad loved you until their last breath. They died asking about you, wondering why their daughter had disappeared from their lives. And I have been searching for a way to reach you ever since they passed, trying to honor their memory by bringing you home. Marcus's face had drained of all color. The name Holbrook carried enormous weight in Connecticut and throughout the entire eastern seaboard. Holbrook Industries was a technology and real estate empire worth over $4 billion. If this bartender was really who he claimed to be, then Marcus had just committed assault against a member of one of the most powerful and well-connected families in American business. This is absurd, Marcus said, but his voice had lost its commanding edge completely. You cannot prove any of these accusations. She fell. I tried to catch her. Everyone simply misunderstood what they saw because of the angle and the lighting, and Garrett pointed toward the ceiling with one steady finger. There is a security camera directly above the bar. High definition. Records everything in this corner of the room. It captured your hand raised, the impact against her face, her stumbling backward with her hand instinctively protecting her stomach. Every detail perfectly preserved. Would you like to see the footage? The remaining color drained from Marcus's face like water running down a drain. A murmur rippled through the assembled guests. Several people who had been secretly recording on their phones held up their devices with renewed confidence, no longer trying to hide their documentation. Whatever narrative Marcus wanted to spin, there were now dozens of pieces of evidence directly contradicting every word. Claire looked at her brother through swimming eyes that could barely focus. You have been here this whole time, watching me. 3 months, Garrett said softly, his voice gentle in a way that contrasted sharply with the steel he had shown Marcus. I knew something was terribly wrong. After Mom and Dad passed, I hired private investigators to find you. They uncovered patterns that made my blood run cold. Hospital visits with suspicious injuries that did not match the explanations given. Financial accounts in your name that you clearly never accessed. Friends who said they had not heard from you in years despite your previously close relationships. He paused, his jaw tightening with barely controlled emotion. So I got a job at this club, the place Marcus brings you every single weekend without fail. I wanted to see for myself what was happening. And I wanted to be close enough to help the moment you finally needed someone. Claire's legs buckled beneath her. Garrett caught her before she hit the polished marble floor, easing her gently onto a chair that a shocked waiter had rushed forward to provide. His hands were steady and warm against her trembling shoulders. And for the first time in 5 agonizing years, Claire felt something she had almost forgotten existed. Safety. Someone call an ambulance immediately, Garrett said loudly, his voice carrying authority that had nothing to do with his bartender uniform. She is 7 months pregnant, and she just suffered physical trauma. She needs to be examined by medical professionals right now. Marcus stepped forward, his hand reaching toward Claire. She is my wife. I will take her to the hospital myself. This is a family matter that does not concern anyone else. You will not touch her. Garrett's voice left absolutely no room for argument or negotiation. Not now, not ever again. And in the shocked silence of the Ridgewood Country Club ballroom, Surrounded by witnesses and cameras and phone recordings and the shattered remains of his carefully constructed reputation, Marcus Weston finally began to understand that he had lost control of something he could never get back. The ambulance arrived within 8 minutes, its sirens cutting through the quiet Connecticut night with urgent purpose. Paramedics loaded Claire onto a stretcher with practiced efficiency while Garrett held her hand tightly, refusing to leave her side for even a moment. Marcus attempted to follow the stretcher toward the exit, but two club security guards blocked his path at Garrett's quiet instruction. "Sir, we need you to remain here until the police arrive," one of the guards said firmly, his hand resting near the radio on his belt. "The police?" Marcus's voice cracked with disbelief and rising panic. "On what grounds I am the victim of harassment and defamation here? That man assaulted me verbally and prevented me from caring for my own wife. Multiple witnesses have reported a physical assault against a pregnant woman. Standard procedure requires us to detain you until officers can take statements. I am sure you understand." Claire heard this exchange from the stretcher as paramedics wheeled her toward the waiting ambulance. Her hand remained clasped tightly in Garrett's grip. She could not stop looking at him, this brother she had lost and miraculously found again on the same devastating night. "I am so sorry," she whispered through her tears, "for believing him, for shutting you out, for missing Mom and Dad's funerals because he told me I was not welcome. For everything." "None of that matters now," Garrett said firmly but gently. "All that matters is getting you safe and keeping you that way." At Hartford Memorial Hospital, Claire was rushed into a private examination room. Doctors checked her vital signs with urgent efficiency, monitored the baby's heartbeat with portable equipment, and documented the bruise spreading across her face with careful photographs. A fetal monitor was attached to her belly, filling the room with the steady whooshing rhythm of her daughter's heart. Strong, steady, unharmed. Claire wept with relief, her body shaking with sobs she could no longer contain. Garrett stood in the corner of the room, speaking quietly but intensely into his phone. Lawyers, Claire assumed. The Holbrook family had an entire army of them on permanent retainer for situations exactly like this. But when he ended the call and returned to her bedside, his expression was deeply troubled in a way that made her heart sink. "Claire," Emma, he said carefully, sitting down beside her and taking her hand, "Marcus has already made moves against you." Her blood ran cold with familiar dread. "What do you mean, Victoria Lane? His personal attorney and fixer? She showed up at the country club approximately 20 minutes after you left in the ambulance. She is already crafting a counter-narrative." "What kind of counter-narrative?" Garrett's jaw tightened before he continued. "She is claiming that you have been suffering from severe pregnancy-induced psychosis, that you have been making irrational and increasingly violent accusations against Marcus for weeks, that he has been deeply concerned about your mental stability and had already filed paperwork with the state requesting an emergency psychiatric evaluation." Claire felt the room spin around her. "That is completely insane. I never made any accusations. He never mentioned any concerns. There were no doctors involved or evaluations discussed." "I know the truth." Garrett squeezed her hand reassuringly. "But the paperwork was filed 3 days ago, before the gala, before tonight's events, which means Marcus anticipated that something like this might eventually happen. He planned for it deliberately." The horror of his words sank in slowly, settling into her bones like ice water. Marcus had not simply lost his temper at the gala. He had created an elaborate safety net well in advance, a legal weapon to discredit her if she ever dared to speak out against him, a trap designed to spring shut if she ever tried to leave. "Can he actually do that?" Claire asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can he have me committed against my will based on paperwork I never knew existed?" Garrett's jaw tightened further. "In Connecticut, a spouse can request a 72-hour involuntary psychiatric hold if they can demonstrate reasonable concern for the person's safety or the safety of others. The request requires a licensed physician's signature to be processed. What doctor would sign something like that without ever examining me? A doctor on Marcus's payroll." Garrett pulled up information on his phone and turned the screen toward her. "Dr. Robert Matthews. He runs a private psychiatric facility called Westbrook Center in Greenwich. He has signed off on emergency holds for 3 other patients connected to Weston Capital over the past 5 years. All women, all cases that were quietly settled out of court with substantial financial payments." Claire felt physically sick, nausea rolling through her in waves. He has done this before to other women. It appears to be a well-established pattern. Victoria Lane's specialty is making problems disappear before they become public scandals. Accusers become patients. Victims become liabilities to be managed. By the time anyone realizes what actually happened, the narrative has already been established and documented in official records. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. A nurse entered, followed by two uniformed police officers whose expressions were carefully neutral. "Mrs. Weston," one of the officers said, "we need to speak with you about the incident at Ridgewood Country Club. Are you feeling well enough to give a statement?" Claire nodded weakly, wiping tears from her uninjured cheek. "Of course, I want to cooperate fully." The officers took her statement carefully and thoroughly, recording everything on official devices. She told them everything she could remember: the years of emotional abuse and systematic isolation, the escalating control over every aspect of her life, the manipulation that had separated her from everyone who loved her, and finally, the slap that everyone in the ballroom had witnessed with their own eyes. When she finished, the officer closed his notebook with a soft click. "Ma'am, based on your statement and the security footage from the club, we have sufficient evidence to file assault charges against your husband." However, there was always a however. Claire braced herself for the blow. "However, we have received official notification that an emergency psychiatric hold has been requested for you by your husband, citing serious concerns about prenatal mental health complications. A judge has already signed the order pending a formal evaluation. We are required by law to transport you to the designated facility," which at Claire's world collapsed around her like a house of cards in a hurricane. She looked at Garrett in desperate panic. He was already on his phone again, his voice sharp and commanding as he barked rapid instructions at whoever was on the other end. "This is not over," he said to her as the officers gently helped her from the bed into a wheelchair. "I will have our lawyers at that facility within the hour. They cannot legally keep you against your will once we prove the paperwork was obtained through fraud." But as they wheeled her out of the hospital room and toward a waiting transport vehicle, Claire felt the walls of her prison closing in tighter than ever before. Marcus had planned for absolutely everything. He had anticipated her every possible move before she even knew she would make it. And now she was being transported to a locked psychiatric facility, separated from her brother, stripped of her freedom and her voice, all while carrying the child she was beginning to fear she might never be allowed to raise. The Westbrook Psychiatric Center looked nothing like a prison from the outside. It resembled an exclusive luxury spa, with meticulously manicured gardens and an elegant fountain splashing peacefully in the circular driveway. The building itself was a converted mansion, all warm brick and white columns and windows that glowed invitingly in the darkness. But Claire knew the truth the moment she passed through the electronically locked doors and heard them click shut behind her with terrifying finality. She was a prisoner wearing a different kind of chains. The intake process was systematically humiliating. Her belongings were confiscated and cataloged. Her phone was taken and locked away. Her jewelry was removed and placed in a small envelope with her name printed on it. She was given shapeless hospital scrubs in an institutional shade of green and soft slippers that whispered against the linoleum floors with every step. Every door she passed required a key card she did not possess. Every window she saw was reinforced and sealed. Every hallway led to another locked barrier that only staff could open. They placed her in a private room with a narrow bed bolted to the floor and a window that offered a view of the gardens but could not be opened more than 2 inches. A camera blinked steadily in the corner of the ceiling, its red light a constant reminder that her every movement was being monitored and recorded. A nurse came first to check her vital signs and attach a fetal monitor that would track her baby's heartbeat continuously. Then a doctor appeared, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a practiced expression of professional concern. He introduced himself as Dr. Robert Matthews. Claire recognized the name immediately from Garrett's research. The doctor on Marcus's payroll, the man who had helped make other women disappear into psychiatric holds they did not deserve. "Mrs. Weston," Dr. Matthews said in a tone of carefully calibrated sympathy, "I understand this must be very confusing and frightening for you. Please believe me when I say your husband is deeply worried about your well-being and the safety of your unborn child. My husband hit me in front of 200 witnesses at a charity gala. The only person who should be worried is him." Don Matthews tilted his head with practiced patience. "That is certainly one interpretation of the events. However, your husband has documented a concerning pattern of paranoid delusions, irrational accusations, and increasingly aggressive behavior that predates tonight's incident by several months. He believes the hormonal changes of pregnancy have severely exacerbated underlying mental health conditions that you have refused to acknowledge or treat. That is a complete fabrication. There is no pattern. There is no documentation. I have never behaved aggressively toward anyone. The documentation does exist. Mrs. Weston, he held up a thick manila folder stuffed with papers. Hospital visits you apparently do not remember. Detailed statements from household staff describing erratic and sometimes violent behavior. A formal letter from your previous therapist expressing serious concern about possible psychotic episodes. Claire's throat constricted painfully. I do not have a previous therapist. I have never seen a therapist in my life. According to these records, you saw Dr. Catherine Pierce for 8 months of intensive treatment before discontinuing against strong medical advice. She documented multiple episodes of dissociation, paranoid ideation, and threats of self-harm. I have never heard that name before this moment. I have never met Dr. Catherine Pierce. Those records are completely fabricated. Dr. Matthews made a careful note in his folder, his pen scratching against the paper. Denial of well-documented facts is often a primary symptom of the very condition we are attempting to diagnose and treat. Mrs. Weston, I genuinely want to help you recover, but you must be willing to accept that help and acknowledge that you may not be perceiving reality accurately. Claire understood then the full sophisticated horror of what Marcus had constructed over months or possibly years. He had built an elaborate paper trail of lies, fabricated medical records, forged therapy notes, false statements from staff members who were paid to say whatever he required. An entire fictional history meticulously designed to paint her as dangerously unstable. If she denied the accusations, she sounded delusional and paranoid. If she accepted them, she was admitting to serious mental illness. Either way, she lost completely. Hours crawled past like wounded animals. Garrett did not appear despite his promises. No lawyers arrived to demand her release. Claire lay on the narrow institutional bed, her hand resting on her stomach, feeling her baby kick rhythmically against her palm as if trying to communicate. I am so sorry, she thought desperately. I am so sorry I brought you into this world with a monster for a father. I am so sorry I was not strong enough to leave before it came to this. The door opened without warning. Marcus walked in. He was alone. No doctors, no nurses, no witnesses. Just him, immaculate in his perfectly tailored suit, with his perfectly arranged hair and his perfectly controlled smile, closing the door deliberately behind him. Hello, Claire. She sat up quickly, pressing her back against the headboard as if she could somehow push through it and escape. You are not supposed to be here. This is a psychiatric facility. There are rules about visitation. I am your loving and concerned husband. I can visit my wife whenever I choose, especially given my profound worry about her mental state. He sat down casually in the single chair, crossing his legs with practiced elegance. The staff here is very understanding about complicated family situations, especially when those families contribute generously to the facility's operating budget. You mean they are paid to look the other way while you terrorize the women you have imprisoned here? His smile widened, showing too many perfect white teeth. You are learning, Claire, slowly, but you are learning how the world actually works. Garrett knows the truth about everything. He has evidence. He has resources. He will expose every single thing you have done. Your brother is certainly a problem, Marcus acknowledged with a casual shrug, but not an insurmountable one. The Holbrook name carries weight. Yes, but so does mine. I have spent years cultivating relationships with judges, prosecutors, politicians, and media executives. Garrett has money and determination, but I have infrastructure specifically designed for situations like this. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper that made her skin crawl. And in approximately 2 months, when our daughter is born, I will have sole legal custody of her from the moment she draws her first breath. The family courts consistently favor stable, successful parents over those with extensively documented psychiatric histories. You will be lucky if you are granted the supervised visitation once a month, assuming you are ever released from facilities like this one. Claire felt ice spreading through her entire body, freezing her from the inside out. You cannot take my baby. I will never let you take her from me. You cannot stop me, and I most certainly can take her. Unless, of course, you choose to cooperate with a more sensible arrangement. He examined his manicured fingernails with affected casualness. Come home, Claire. Tell everyone that tonight was simply a misunderstanding blown out of proportion by your protective brother. Tell them the stress of a difficult pregnancy made you confused and emotional and prone to exaggeration. Do that convincingly, and this entire nightmare disappears. Our daughter will have both parents under one roof. Our family will remain intact. Your life will continue in comfort and privilege. Our family was never intact. You controlled every aspect of my existence. You hurt me in ways no one could see. You made me believe my own brother and parents hated me while they were desperately trying to reach me. Marcus sighed with exaggerated patience, as if dealing with a particularly slow and frustrating child. You are not seeing the big picture here. Claire, but you will. Give it a few days in this facility. Let the isolation and uncertainty work on your mind. You will eventually realize that cooperation is the only viable path forward. He stood and walked toward the door with unhurried confidence. Then he paused, looking back over his shoulder with an expression that made her blood freeze. The baby is due in approximately 8 weeks. I have already filed all necessary paperwork for emergency custody the moment she is born. The petition specifically names this facility as primary evidence of your unfitness as a mother. His smile turned cold as a blade. Sleep well. Claire, I will visit again soon. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like a coffin lid settling into place. And Claire, utterly alone in that sterile room with cameras watching her every breath and movement, finally understood the full terrifying scope of what she was fighting against. 72 hours in the Westbrook Psychiatric Center felt like 72 years of slow suffocation. Claire was interviewed daily by Dr. Robert Matthews, who asked carefully leading questions designed to make her sound paranoid and disconnected from reality, regardless of how she answered. She was given medication she pretended to take, hiding the pills under her tongue and spitting them out later when the nurses were not watching. She was observed constantly, her every word and gesture and expression documented for a file she was not permitted to see. But on the third day, as hope was beginning to fade into gray resignation, something unexpected changed. A new doctor appeared at her door, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, silver-streaked auburn hair, and a warm smile that seemed genuine rather than professional. Mrs. Weston, my name is Dr. Catherine Pierce. Claire's blood turned to ice in her veins. You are the therapist. The one Marcus claims I saw for 8 months of treatment. The one whose signature is on documents saying I threatened to hurt myself. Dr. Pierce closed the door carefully behind her and pulled a chair close to the bed before sitting down. I have never met you before this moment, Mrs. Weston, but I discovered early this morning that my name, my medical credentials, and my professional signature have been attached to extensively fabricated documents in your case file. Documents I absolutely did not write, therapy notes I never recorded, statements I never made about a patient I never saw. Claire stared at her, afraid to hope but unable to stop herself. Why are you telling me this? Why would you risk involvement? Because I have been a licensed psychiatrist for 30 years, and I have built my entire career on helping vulnerable people. I will not allow my name and reputation to be weaponized to imprison innocent women for the convenience of abusive husbands. Pierce leaned forward, her expression intense and determined. Mrs. Weston, after receiving notification that my credentials had been used in your case, I pulled every single document associated with your file, the hospital visit records, the household staff statements, the therapy notes bearing my forged signature. All of them were created within the last 6 months. The metadata embedded in the digital files proves beyond question that they were fabricated recently and backdated to appear historical. For the first time in 3 endless months, Claire felt a flicker of hope ignite in her chest. Can you testify to that in court? I fully intend to testify under oath about every fraudulent document bearing my name. I have already filed a formal complaint with the Connecticut Medical Licensing Board. I have also reached out to your brother's legal team with my preliminary findings. You know Garrett. He has been attempting to reach you since the moment you were admitted to this facility. The administration blocked every phone call he made and refused every visit he requested, citing your husband's specific instructions that contact with family members might exacerbate your fragile mental state. Dr. Pierce allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. But your brother is remarkably resourceful when properly motivated. He hired me as an independent outside consultant to conduct a formal review of your case. The moment I examined the documentation and recognized my own forged signature, I understood exactly what was happening here. Claire's hands trembled with relief and renewed fear. Can you actually get me released from this place? I believe so. The psychiatric hold was obtained entirely through fraudulent paperwork. Once I present my documented findings to a judge, the hold should be invalidated immediately as legally void. And she paused, her expression growing more serious. But there is additional information you need to know. The hope in Claire's chest flickered uncertainly. Victoria Lane, your husband's attorney, made a critical procedural error in her rush to file the psychiatric hold documents. She used Dr. Matthews' electronic signature without his personal knowledge or consent. According to facility records, Dr. Matthews was attending a medical conference in Chicago on the day the paperwork was officially submitted to the court. He physically could not have signed the documents himself. So his signature on the hold order is also forged. Multiple signatures were forged across multiple documents. That level of systematic document fraud elevates this from a civil matter to a serious criminal offense. And in Connecticut, criminal fraud involving medical records and court filings means the district attorney's office has independent jurisdiction to file charges against everyone involved. Claire exhaled shakily, her entire body trembling with a complex mixture of relief, fear, anger, and cautious hope. This is actually really happening. This nightmare might actually end. Dr. Pierce studied her carefully for a long, assessing moment. I need to prepare you for what comes next. Mrs. Weston, your husband is extraordinarily powerful and well-connected. He has substantial resources and relationships throughout the legal system. Even with clear evidence of fraud, the process of achieving justice will take considerable time. He will fight this exposure with absolutely everything at his disposal. I understand that better than anyone. Are you genuinely prepared for what that fight will require, the intense public scrutiny of your marriage and your mental health, the vicious attacks on your character and credibility, the months or possibly years of legal proceedings before reaching any resolution? Claire thought about her baby, about the months of systematic abuse she had endured in silence, about her brother who had never stopped searching for her, even when she pushed him away because of lies she believed, about her parents who died without ever understanding why their daughter had abandoned them. I have been silent for 5 years, she said quietly, her voice growing stronger with each word. I let Marcus convince me that I was worthless and crazy and completely alone, that no one would ever believe me if I spoke up, that I deserved everything he did to me. She met Dr. Pierce's eyes with steady determination. I am done being silent, whatever this fight requires, however long it takes, however much it costs me personally. I am going to fight until I win or until I have nothing left. For my daughter, for myself, for every woman Marcus has done this to before me. Pierce nodded with something that looked very much like professional respect and personal admiration. Then let us begin. The emergency hearing took place in a Connecticut Superior Courthouse exactly 48 hours after Dr. Pierce's intervention at the psychiatric facility. Claire sat at a polished wooden table beside Garrett and an impressive team of 7 lawyers, her hands folded carefully in her lap to hide their persistent trembling. She wore simple clothes Garrett had brought her, nothing fancy, just clean and professional and appropriate for court. Across the center aisle, Marcus sat with Victoria Lane and his own substantial legal team. His expression was composed and confident, the mask of the wronged husband firmly in place for the judge and the observers in the gallery. But Claire could see the barely controlled fury burning in his eyes every time he looked in her direction. Judge Patricia Winters presided over the proceedings from her elevated bench. She was a formidable woman in her early 60s, known throughout the Connecticut legal community for her no-nonsense approach to family matters and her absolute refusal to be intimidated by wealth, status, or political connections. Her reputation for fairness was legendary. So was her reputation for punishing lawyers who tried to manipulate her courtroom. Dr. Catherine Pierce was called as the first witness. She testified for nearly an hour, presenting her detailed forensic analysis of every forged document in Claire's psychiatric file. She explained the metadata inconsistencies that proved recent fabrication. She walked through the impossible timeline that showed documents supposedly created years ago were actually produced within the last 6 months. She demonstrated conclusively the fraudulent use of her own professional credentials and medical license. The judge listened intently throughout, making extensive notes in her leather-bound journal. Robert Matthews was called next. Under oath and facing potential criminal liability, he admitted with visible reluctance that he had not personally reviewed or signed the psychiatric hold paperwork before it was submitted to the court. He claimed he believed his administrative staff had handled the documentation appropriately according to standard procedures. But his obvious discomfort on the witness stand was apparent to everyone in the courtroom. Victoria Lane attempted aggressive damage control during her cross-examination, arguing strenuously that any irregularities in documentation were simple administrative errors rather than intentional fraud. But her carefully prepared arguments withered and collapsed under Judge Winters' sharp, probing questions about why so many administrative errors all happened to benefit the same client in the same case. Finally, after 4 hours of testimony and argument, the judge was ready to render her decision. Based on the extensive evidence presented in this courtroom today, Judge Winters said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent chamber, I find that the emergency psychiatric hold placed on Claire Weston was obtained through systematic fraudulent means, including forged signatures, fabricated medical records, and falsified professional credentials. The hold is hereby declared legally void and is immediately invalidated. Mrs. Weston is free to leave this courthouse without any restrictions on her liberty. Claire let out a shaky breath she had been holding for what felt like hours, but Judge Winters was not finished speaking. Furthermore, I am formally referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for immediate investigation of potential criminal fraud, forgery, and conspiracy charges. I am also scheduling a comprehensive custody hearing for this matter 7 days from today. She turned her stern gaze toward both legal teams equally. Until that hearing is concluded, neither parent shall have exclusive custody of any child born to this marriage. If Mrs. Weston's baby is delivered before the hearing date, the child shall remain in neutral hospital care under court supervision until permanent custody is determined. Marcus's jaw clenched visibly with suppressed rage, but his lawyers placed warning hands on his arms and he remained silent. Outside the courthouse, Garrett's security team efficiently escorted Claire through a gauntlet of shouting reporters and flashing cameras to a waiting armored SUV. Questions flew at her from every direction. Microphones were thrust toward her face. Camera operators jostled for position. You did it, Garrett said as the vehicle pulled away from the chaos. The fraudulent hold is dissolved. The criminal referral is happening. You are finally free. Claire shook her head slowly, watching the courthouse recede through the tinted rear window. Not yet, not completely. The custody hearing is still 7 days away, and Marcus has not shown anywhere near all his cards yet. He has been planning and preparing for years. This is just the beginning of his counterattack. She was absolutely right to be cautious. That night, staying in a secure guest suite at Garrett's heavily protected Connecticut estate, Claire was jolted awake at 2 in the morning by her phone buzzing frantically with an endless stream of notifications. She checked the screen with sleep-blurred eyes and felt her blood crystallize into ice. Marcus had released a video to every major media outlet simultaneously. The video showed Claire, or someone who looked exactly identical to Claire, screaming hysterically at Marcus in the living room of their penthouse, throwing expensive objects at his head, threatening to hurt herself with a kitchen knife, threatening to hurt the baby if he did not give her what she wanted. Her face, her voice, her exact mannerisms and speech patterns, all captured in horrifying, convincing detail. The video was everywhere within minutes. Every national news outlet, every social media platform, every tabloid website and gossip blog, millions of views accumulating by the second, tens of thousands of comments piling up faster than anyone could read them. She is the real abuser. That poor man, he was just protecting himself from a crazy woman. Take her baby away before she hurts the innocent child. She should be locked up permanently. Claire stared at her phone screen, her entire body shaking with horror and disbelief. It was not real. She had never done any of those things. She had never screamed like that. She had never threatened anyone with anything. The events in the video had simply never happened. But the video looked absolutely, terrifyingly authentic. Every detail was perfect. Every expression matched her real face exactly. Every word was spoken in her exact voice. Garrett burst into her room moments later, his face pale with shock and urgency. I saw it posted. My tech team is already pulling it apart frame by frame. It is a deep fake, Claire whispered, her voice hollow. It has to be artificially generated. I never did any of those things. I never said any of those words. We will prove that conclusively. But Claire, you need to understand what is happening. This is going to get significantly worse before it gets better. Public opinion is already turning massively against you. The custody hearing is in 6 days. Marcus is trying to win his case in the court of public opinion before he even sets foot in an actual courtroom. Claire felt the walls of her prison closing in around her once again. Every single time she gained ground, Marcus found a new and more devastating way to destroy her progress. That night, alone in the elegant guest room of her brother's estate, she sat in darkness for hours. Her phone continued buzzing relentlessly with notifications she refused to read. The deepfake video played on continuous loop in her tortured mind. In the bathroom medicine cabinet, she found a bottle of prescription sleeping pills that belonged to someone on Garrett's household staff. She held the bottle in her trembling hands, turning it over and over in the dim light. Not to take them, but the fact that she was even considering it as an option terrified her more deeply than anything Marcus had ever done to her. She was at absolute rock bottom, and she had no clear idea how to begin climbing back up. The call came at 2:30 in the morning. Claire had been staring at the bedroom ceiling for hours, completely unable to sleep. The bottle of sleeping pills now hidden in a drawer where she would not have to look at them anymore. When her phone rang with an unknown number, she almost let it go to voicemail. But something, some instinct or desperate hope, made her reach for it. Mrs. Weston. The voice was female, warm and professional, with an undercurrent of urgency. This is Dr. Evelyn Cross. I was your OBGYN at Hartford Memorial throughout your pregnancy. Claire pushed herself upright against the headboard. Dr. Cross. Yes, I remember you. I have been watching the news coverage obsessively since last night. That video your husband released. The accusations being made against you. And I need you to understand something critically important. What is it? I have medical records in my possession that directly contradict everything Marcus is claiming about you. Every single prenatal visit you made to my office over the past 7 months, I meticulously documented any injuries I observed. Bruises on your arms that did not match the explanations you provided. Anxiety levels and stress markers that suggested chronic psychological trauma. Weight loss during periods when you should have been gaining. I kept extremely detailed notes because I strongly suspected something was terribly wrong at home, even though you always denied it when I asked directly. Claire's throat constricted painfully with emotion. Why did you never file an official report? Because you specifically asked me not to. Multiple times. You insisted you were simply clumsy during pregnancy. You claimed you were stressed about work obligations. Without your cooperation and explicit consent, I had no legal standing to file a mandatory report, but I documented absolutely everything, hoping and praying that someday you might need the evidence to protect yourself. Tears spilled freely down Claire's cheeks. I was so afraid, he had me completely convinced that no one would ever believe me. I believe you absolutely, Mrs. Weston, and there is more evidence that you need to know about. Dr. Cross paused, and Claire could hear papers shuffling in the background. The night your daughter was born prematurely, there was a security camera operating in your delivery room. Hospital policy requires video documentation for all high-risk births for liability protection purposes. That footage has not been deleted or overwritten, and it shows your husband threatening you during active labor, threatening to take the baby permanently, threatening to destroy your life completely if you did not cooperate with his demands. Every word he spoke is captured clearly on audio. Claire stopped breathing entirely. You have that footage. It still exists. I retrieved it personally from hospital archives this morning before anyone else could access or delete it. I am transmitting it to your brother's legal team right now as we speak. Cross's voice softened with genuine compassion. Mrs. Weston, I understand that you feel like you have lost absolutely everything. but you have more allies than you realize. And the truth has a persistent way of surfacing eventually, no matter how hard powerful people try to bury it permanently. After the call ended, Claire sat motionless in the darkness for a very long time, processing what she had learned. Then she got up, splashed cold water on her face, and walked purposefully to Garrett's study, where she knew he would be working despite the late hour. He was always working, always fighting, always searching for another angle of attack. "I need to record a video, she said from the doorway. Garrett looked up from his laptop, surprised. "What kind of video?" "The truth. My actual story. Everything that really happened to me over the past 5 years." She met his eyes with renewed determination. "Marcus wants to control the narrative completely. He wants everyone to believe I am dangerous and crazy, but he forgot something important about me." "What is that?" "I was a trial lawyer before I was his wife. I know how to make a compelling case. And I am not the only one who can tell a persuasive story." They recorded it that night in Garrett's study, using professional equipment his team assembled within an hour. No makeup, no fancy production values, no script or teleprompter. Just Claire, sitting in a simple chair against a neutral background, looking directly into the camera lens and speaking the unvarnished truth. She talked about falling in love with Marcus at a charity event, about the whirlwind romance that swept her off her feet, about the slow, systematic escalation of control that she did not recognize until it was far too late, about the deliberate isolation from her family and friends, about the fear that became so constant and overwhelming that she eventually forgot what safety and happiness even felt like. She showed her medical records with Dr. Cross's detailed documentation of suspicious injuries. She explained the fabricated psychiatric hold and forged documents with calm precision. She addressed the deepfake video directly, explaining that independent forensic experts were already analyzing it and would conclusively prove it was artificially manufactured. And then she said the words that would ultimately change everything. "I am not asking you to believe me simply because I am a woman making accusations against a powerful man. I am not asking you to believe me because I come from a wealthy and influential family. I am asking you to look objectively at the evidence. Look at the documented pattern of behavior. Look at the truth that is hiding in plain sight." She paused, her hand resting gently on her pregnant stomach as her baby kicked in response to her elevated heartbeat. "In 5 days, a judge will decide who receives custody of my daughter. I honestly do not know what the outcome will be. The legal system is imperfect, and money can corrupt almost anything. But I know this with absolute certainty. No matter what Marcus does to me personally, no matter how many lies he tells, no matter how much money he spends trying to silence me, I will never stop fighting for my child, because she deserves a mother who chose her over fear. She deserves to know that I fought for her with everything I had." The video was uploaded at midnight and distributed through every platform simultaneously. By sunrise, it had accumulated over 4 million views and was still climbing exponentially. The final confrontation took place exactly where it had all begun. Ridgewood Country Club. Garrett had arranged a meeting with the Weston Capital board members under the pretense of discussing a potential multi-billion-dollar business partnership between Holbrook Industries and their firm. Marcus arrived at the club expecting to charm his way through yet another crisis using the same manipulative skills that had served him so well throughout his career. Instead, he walked confidently into a private dining room and found his wife waiting calmly for him at the head of the long mahogany table. Claire stood straight and composed. Garrett was positioned beside her with quiet strength. Detective Ruth Brennan stood near the doorway with 2 federal agents in dark suits. The 5 board members of Weston Capital were seated around the table, but their expressions made clear they were not there to support their CEO. They were there as witnesses to his destruction. Marcus stopped abruptly in the doorway, his confident stride faltering. For the first time since Claire had known him, he looked genuinely and completely surprised. "What is this?" Claire spoke first, her voice steady and clear. "This is the end, Marcus. The end of what exactly? Your pathetic delusions." He attempted his characteristic dismissive laugh, but the sound came out hollow and unconvincing. "I have expensive lawyers. I have manufactured evidence. Your little sympathy video changed nothing of substance. Actually, it changed absolutely everything." Garrett stepped forward with controlled authority. "My forensic technology team completed their analysis of your deepfake video 12 hours ago. They identified the specific AI generation software used to create it by isolating unique digital fingerprints in the file metadata. They traced that proprietary software to a company called Synth Media Dynamics, a firm that Weston Capital has quietly funded through shell corporations for the past 3 years. The same company that was contracted to create the fabricated video evidence used to commit my sister to a psychiatric facility. Marcus's face lost some of its confident color, but he maintained his aggressive stance. That proves absolutely nothing concrete. On its own, perhaps not, but combined with the hospital security footage from the night my niece was born, Claire shook her head slowly. The footage that captured you threatening me while I was in active labor. The footage where you explicitly stated you would take my baby bum and destroy my life if I did not comply with your demands. The footage you did not know existed because you were too arrogant to check for cameras. Detective Brennan stepped forward from her position near the door. Mr. Weston, my unit has been building a comprehensive case against you for the past 3 months, starting well before the incident at this club. Wire fraud across multiple state lines, systematic document forgery involving medical and legal records, criminal conspiracy with at least 4 other individuals, witness tampering and intimidation. The deepfake video you distributed crosses state lines, which elevates this to federal jurisdiction. The federal agents stepped forward in synchronized movement. Marcus looked desperately around the room, searching for any ally or escape route. This is completely absurd. I am the victim here. My wife is mentally unstable. She has been manipulating everyone with her lies and false accusations. Anna Campbell, a senior board member who had known Marcus for 15 years, shook her head with visible disgust. Marcus, we have seen all of the evidence, every piece of it. The medical records documenting your wife's injuries over 5 years. The forged documents bearing signatures of people who were not present to sign them. The recorded threats you made to a woman in labor. Her voice hardened with finality. There is absolutely no coming back from this. Not professionally, not legally, not personally. The board cannot terminate me, Marcus sputtered, his polished facade crumbling completely. I built this company from nothing. I made every single one of you wealthy beyond your dreams. Thomas Fletcher rose slowly from his seat. The board can and will terminate your employment and strip your equity, effective immediately. Your conduct has created catastrophic liability for Weston Capital and every person associated with it. Institutional investors began pulling their capital yesterday morning. We have lost approximately 40% of our assets under management in less than 72 hours. Shareholders are preparing class action litigation. He straightened his tie with deliberate calm. As of this moment, you are removed as Chief Executive Officer of Weston Capital Group. Security will escort you from the premises after the federal agents have concluded their business with you. Marcus's carefully constructed world was collapsing around him in real time, and everyone in the room could see the exact moment he finally understood that his power was completely gone. He turned to Claire with an expression twisted by hatred and desperate disbelief. You cannot do this to me. After everything I gave you, everything I sacrificed for you, everything I did to build the life you enjoyed. While Claire met his gaze without flinching, without trembling, without any trace of the fear that had controlled her for 5 long years. You gave me nothing but fear and isolation and pain. You took my legal career that I worked years to build. You stole my family from me through manipulation and lies. You systematically destroyed my confidence and my sense of self-worth. You almost succeeded in taking my sanity. Her voice did not waver even slightly. But you will not take my daughter. Not now, not ever. She will grow up knowing that her mother found the courage to fight back against a monster. She will know that evil can be defeated when good people refuse to stay silent. The federal agents moved toward Marcus with practiced efficiency. Marcus Weston, you are under arrest for wire fraud, document forgery, conspiracy to commit fraud, and witness tampering. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. As they secured his wrists in handcuffs and guided him toward the dining room door, Marcus looked back at Claire one final time. His expression was twisted with impotent hatred and complete disbelief. This is not over, he spat. Not by a long way. I will appeal. I will fight. I will make you regret every moment of this. Claire watched him being led away with calm certainty. Yes, Marcus, It is finally over. You just do not know how to accept it yet. 3 weeks later, Claire sat in a cushioned rocking chair in the pediatric wing of Hartford Memorial Hospital. Her daughter Lily was cradled safely in her arms, finally healthy enough to be discharged from the NICU after her premature arrival. The baby had been born at just over 3 pounds due to the extreme stress of everything that happened, but she had fought her way to health with the same fierce determination her mother had demonstrated. Garrett stood nearby at the window, watching his sister and niece with quiet joy and profound relief. "The divorce was finalized this morning," he said softly. "All of Marcus's personal and corporate assets are frozen pending the federal trial and civil litigation. Victoria Lane has been permanently disbarred for her role in the fraud scheme, and the Weston Capital Board has already appointed an interim CEO to begin rebuilding the company's shattered reputation." Claire nodded slowly, but her eyes never left her daughter's peaceful sleeping face. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "After everything, whatever you want to happen, you have substantial resources from the divorce settlement and your share of our family holdings. You can go anywhere in the world, do absolutely anything, start completely over with a clean slate." Claire considered this carefully for a long, thoughtful moment. "I want to stay," she finally said. "Not in the penthouse where I was a prisoner, not in that life where I was afraid of my own shadow, but here in Connecticut, close to you, close to what remains of our family." She looked up at her brother with glistening eyes. "I spent 5 years believing I had no one in the world, that everyone who loved me had abandoned me. I do not want to run away from the people who proved that was a lie. I want to rebuild my life surrounded by people I can trust." Garrett smiled warmly and sat down in the chair beside her. "Oh, then you stay, and we rebuild together." Outside the hospital window, the sun was setting in spectacular fashion. The sky blazed with brilliant shades of orange and pink and gold, the kind of sunset that feels like a promise of better things to come. Claire looked down at her daughter, this tiny perfect miracle, who had given her the courage to fight when she had absolutely nothing left. "I am going to tell you a story someday, little one," she whispered softly against the baby's downy head, "about how you saved your mommy's life, about how your name means light because you were my light in the darkest time I have ever known, about how our story did not end when everything fell apart around us." She pressed a gentle kiss to her daughter's forehead. "Our story started the moment I decided to fight for you." Lily yawned contentedly and stretched her tiny fingers, wrapping them instinctively around her mother's thumb. Claire smiled through her tears, feeling peace settle into her bones for the first time in longer than she could remember. "Welcome to the world, my beautiful girl. We are going to be more than okay. We are going to be extraordinary." The camera in her mind pulled back, capturing this moment of hard-won peace and infinite promise. A mother and her child, a protective brother standing guard, a future that had once seemed impossible now stretching out before them like an open road leading toward the horizon. Behind them lay the weight of the past, heavy but no longer crushing. Ahead of them lay the possibility of healing, of joy, of a life built on truth instead of fear. And somewhere in the distance, carried on the evening breeze, came the sound of justice finally being served.